chaos bunker.
Stephen King once said that writing is like driving at night with the headlights on. You can only see a little bit what's ahead of you, but you can make the whole journey that way. In 2010, a Finnish game studio called Remedy Entertainment took that metaphor literally. They made a game about a writer trapped in his own nightmare, where the only thing standing between him and the darkness was a flashlight. Alan Wake wasn't just a game about a writer losing control of his story. It was a story about losing control. 5 years in development, multiple delays, an entire game concept scrapped and rebuilt. The studio betting everything on a genre-bending experiment that critics would call ambitious, players would call divisive, and the market would call a commercial disappointment. But here's the thing about Alan Wake. It refused to be forgotten. 14 years later, we're still talking about it, still debating it, still trying to understand what made it feel so special, even when it didn't quite work. This is a video about a flawed masterpiece, about what happens when a game tries to be literature, about the cost of creative ambition in an industry that was already starting to play it safe, and maybe, just maybe, about why we need more games willing to stumble in the dark. To understand Alan Wake, you have to understand the moment it arrived in. In 2010, the Xbox 360 and PS3 were hitting their stride. Gaming had gone HD, gone mainstream, and gone big. This was the year that Red Dead Redemption refined open worlds. The year Mass Effect 2 proved sequels could be better. The year God of War 3 closed out Kratos' original trilogy in a spectacular, blood-soaked fashion. But more importantly, this was games' identity crisis era. Call of Duty 4 had come out about 3 years prior and completely reshaped what it means to have a blockbuster game. Suddenly, every big budget title needed to be fast, loud, and explosive. The industry was chasing the Call of Duty formula like it was the only way forward. Meanwhile, the indie scene was just starting to simmer. Braid had dropped in 2008. Limbo would arrive just 2 months after Alan Wake. But we were still a year away from Dark Souls reminding everyone that challenging weird games could still succeed. The third-person action adventure dominated. Uncharted 2 had won Game of the Year, setting the blueprint, charismatic protagonist, and cinematic presentation. Everyone wanted to be the next big adventure game. Everyone wanted their Nathan Drake moment. And then there was Remedy Entertainment, the Max Payne guys, the studio that had made bullet time iconic, that had wrapped the John Woo action in their noir poetry, that had proven games could have style and substance. But Max Payne 2 came out in 2003. By 2010, it had been 7 years. 7 years of hype, 7 years of delays, 7 years of when is Alan Wake actually coming out? The game had been announced in 2005. It had been shown at E3 multiple times, demoed behind closed doors, teased in trailers. It was supposed to be an open world thriller. Then it wasn't. It was supposed to be a PC exclusive. Then it wasn't. The game Remedy started making in 2005 was not the game that shipped in 2010. And there was the Microsoft factor. Alan Wake was an Xbox 360 exclusive, at least initially, which meant it was caught in the console war era where exclusives were supposed to be system sellers. Remedy had Microsoft's backing, sure, but they also had Microsoft's expectations. This wasn't just a passion project for anyone. This was a flagship title, a showcase for what the 360 could do. The pressure was immense, the scrutiny was real, and Remedy was trying to do something that most studios weren't even attempting. They were trying to make a game that felt like a literature. So when Alan Wake finally launched in May 2010, it wasn't just another game release. It was the end of a 5-year creative journey, the studio's entire reputation on the line, a test of whether weird, ambitious, story driven games still had a place in gaming's increasingly blockbuster obsessed landscape. Spoiler, the answer was complicated. Alan Wake opened with a promise: a log cabin in the Pacific Northwest, fog rolling through trees, a writer on vacation, trying to overcome his creative block. And then something goes wrong. The pitch was simple: Twin Peaks meets Stephen King. If you grew up on 90s thriller television and horror paperbacks, Alan Wake was calling your name. It wore its influences proudly: the small town mystery, the supernatural dread, the unreliable narrator, the sense that reality itself might be unraveling. But what made Alan Wake different was how he structured its story. Episodes. The game was broken into 6 episodes, complete with previously on Alan Wake recap screens and cliffhanger endings. In 2010, this was radical. Sure, Half-Life 2 had episodic content and Telltale was starting to experiment with the format. But for a full-budget single-player action game to lean this hard into a TV structure was kind of bold. Each episode felt deliberate, paced like someone had actually thought about rhythm and momentum instead of just showing encounters. You'd play through a tense chapter, like hit a climax, then get a breather with a recap and a licensed soundtrack. It felt authored, crafted, like someone gave a damn. Someone gave a damn about how you experienced the story, not whether you experienced it. And then there was lighting. Alan Wake's entire visual identity was built around light and shadow. The Pacific Northwest setting, Bright Falls, Washington, was drenched in atmosphere, mist forests. Small town Americana with something sinister lurking beneath. And the lighting engine Remedy built? For 2010 it was stunning. Realistic shadows, volumetric fog. The way a flashlight beam cut through darkness felt tangible. This wasn't just tech for tech's sake. The lighting was the game. And critics noticed. The game landed somewhere in the 80s on the Metacritic. Respectable, but not exceptional. Reviewers praised the atmosphere, the ambition, the storytelling. But there were complaints. The combat got repetitive. The pacing sagged in the middle. Well, it felt like some sort it was too linear. Others thought it was too slow. Commercially, it underperformed. Microsoft had expected a system seller. What they got was a cult game. It didn't move consoles, it didn't dominate sales charts within a few months. It had been overshadowed by bigger releases. But here's the thing about Alan Wake: it stuck around. People who played it remembered it, they debated it. They recommended it to friends with, look, it's not perfect, but you have to experience it. The game found its audience slowly and quietly, like a campfire story passed from person to person. When it finally came to PC in 2012, it found a whole new life on Steam. Cult classic status, earned the hard way. Because Alan Wake wasn't just a game about a writer trapped in a nightmare. It was a game about what happens when you refuse to compromise your vision, even when the market doesn't know what to do with you. About the cost of being different. About how the most memorable experiences are often the ones that risk falling flat. And that's exactly what made it special. But to really understand Alan Wake, we need to go deeper into the manuscript pages, into the mechanics, into the story Remedy was really telling. Alan Wake opens with a line that sets the entire game's tone. Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. And then Alan Wake, the character, immediately starts explaining this nightmare to you. That's the game in a nutshell. A writer narrating his own horror story as you play through it. A man trapped in a narrative he may or may not be creating. And you, the player, caught somewhere between experiencing his nightmare and watching him write it in real time. The manuscript pages are where it all comes together. Scattered throughout the game, these pages are torn from a thriller novel Alan doesn't remember writing. They quote departure, and they describe the exact events you're living through. Sometimes they foreshadow what's about to happen. Sometimes they describe what just happened. Sometimes they contradict what you saw with your own eyes. You'll find a page that says, "The blackbirds attacked without warning," and then minutes later, you're dodging possessed crows dive bombing you from the trees above. The game is telling you what's coming, but that doesn't make it less effective. If anything, it cranks up the dread. You know something terrible is about to happen, you just don't know when. But here's where it gets interesting. Alan claims he didn't write these pages. He can't remember writing them. So where are they coming from? Is the dark presence forcing him to write? Is he writing unconsciously? Is this all happening in his head? Is he an unreliable narrator, or is the world unreliable? Then the game never gives you a clean answer, and that ambiguity is the point. Because Alan Wake isn't just about a writer trapped in a story, it's about the act of creation itself, the loss of control that comes with making something. You start with an idea, a vision, and somewhere along the way, it takes on a life of its own. Characters do things you didn't plan. Plot threads spiral out of control. The story writes itself, and you're just along for the ride, trying to make sense of the chaos. There are layers to this thing. On the surface level, Alan Wake is writing a horror story, and it's coming to life around him. That's the plot. One layer deeper, you are experiencing Alan's experience. You're not just controlling him, you're living his confusion, his fear, his desperation. When he doesn't understand what's happening, neither do you. The game makes you complicit in his unreliable narration. And then there's the deepest layer, Remedy Entertainment. A studio that has spent 5 years wrestling with this game, changing it, scrapping it, rebuilding it. They're writing about the struggle of creation itself, but how making art can feel like being trapped in a nightmare you can't escape. About how the thing you're making starts to consume you. Sam Lake, Remedy's creative director, once said that Alan Wake was the most personal game they'd ever made. And you can feel it. This isn't just a thriller about a writer, it's a confession. A studio pouring their creative anxieties, their frustrations, their obsessions into a game, and hoping someone out there understands. For some players, this clicked immediately. The meta narrative felt bold, literally different. It elevated the game beyond just another action title. It gave weight to every encounter, every piece of dialogue, every manuscript page. You weren't just playing a game, you were engaging with the text, interpreting it, and questioning it. For others, it felt pretentious, too in love with its own cleverness. The constant narration became grating. The manuscript pages felt like spoilers instead of foreshadowing. The ambiguity wasn't mysterious, it was frustrating. And that divide still exists today. Alan Wake is a game people either get or they don't. There's no middle ground. You either buy into the meta narrative and let it carry you, or you bounce off it hard. But love it or hate it, you can't deny it was ambitious. In 2010, most games were still figuring out how to tell stories at all. Alan Wake was asking, what if the story acknowledged that it's a story? What if we made that the whole point? That's not just ambitious, that's borderline reckless. And that's exactly why it still matters. Let's talk about the flashlight. In most action games, your primary weapon is a gun. In Alan Wake, it's a maglite. The enemies, the Taken, are people possessed by malevolent darkness. They're shrouded in shadow, and as long as that shadow clings to them, they're invulnerable. Bullets do nothing. Your revolver might as well be a paperweight. The only way to hurt them is to burn away the darkness first. So you aim your flashlight, you hold down the trigger, the beam intensifies, eating away at the shadow like acid. The Taken scream, thrash, recoil from the light, and only when the darkness is gone, they're exposed and vulnerable, then you can actually kill them. It's a simple mechanic, but it's everything. Because the light isn't just a weapon in Alan Wake, it's safety, it's clarity, it's truth. Standing under a street lamp means you're safe. The Taken can't touch you there. Flares create pockets of sanctuary. Flashbangs obliterate everything in a burst of purifying brilliance. Light is your lifeline, your sanity, your only defense against a world that's trying to swallow you whole. And darkness? Darkness is the opposite. It lies, confusion, danger. The forest at night isn't just scary because of what's hiding in it. It's scary because you can't see, you can't know. Every shadow could be an enemy, every rustle in the trees could be death. The darkness doesn't just threaten you, it erases itself, replacing it with nightmare logic. This is where the metaphor clicks into place. Alan Wake is a writer suffering from creative block. He can't write, he can't create. His mind is a blank page consumed by darkness. And he's desperately searching for the light, the spark, the idea, the clarity that will let him finish the story. The Taken aren't just monsters, they're manifestations of doubt, fear, self-sabotage, all the voices in the creator's head that say, you can't do this, you're not good enough, give up. And the only way to fight them is with light, with truth, with clarity, with the refusal to let darkness win. The game makes this literal in ways both subtle and obvious. Wake's narration constantly references writing, creation, control. The manuscript pages describe the horror, but they also describe the act of writing the horror. The darkness consuming Bright Falls is writer's block made manifest. The blank page swallowing everything, and Alan desperately trying to fill it before it consumes him too. It's a brilliant metaphor, and when it works, it works. The tension is real. You're constantly managing resources, flashlight batteries, flares, ammunition. Every encounter is a puzzle. Do you burn through all your supplies now, or conserve them for later? Do you fight or do you run? The atmosphere is oppressive. The forests are claustrophobic. The sound design makes every snapped twig feel like a threat. When you finally reach a safe haven, a street lamp, a cabin, a gas station, bathed in fluorescent light, the relief is palpable. But here's the problem. The gameplay is too repetitive. Dodge an axe, shine your flashlight, wait for the darkness to burn away, shoot, repeat. For 6 episodes. The encounters start to blur together, the forests all look the same, the Taken all behave the same, and by episode 4, you've seen everything the game has to offer. And you're just doing it again and again and again. Cryptic's Hammer at this point, the combat was functional, sure, but it didn't evolve. There were no new mechanics introduced late game, no real surprises. The game leaned so hard on the atmosphere and narrative that it forgot to keep the gameplay engaging. And then there's the question of genre. What is Alan Wake exactly? It's marketed as a thriller. It has horror elements, but it's not really a survival horror. You have too many resources, too many ammo. It's not really an action game. The combat is too slow, too methodical. It's stuck in this weird middle ground, trying to be both and ending up as neither. Some players appreciated that. The game wasn't about being scary in the jump scare sense. It wasn't about dread and about the slow creep of unease, about atmosphere over adrenaline. It was less Resident Evil, more Twilight Zone. But for others, that middle ground felt like a cop out. It wasn't tense enough to be a horror. It wasn't exciting enough to be action. It was just okay, functional, safe. And safe is the last thing a game about chaos and creativity should feel like. Still, there's something undeniably compelling about the light versus dark mechanics. Even when the gameplay gets repetitive, the idea behind it seems strong. Every time you burn away the darkness, every time you reach a safe haven, every time you flick a generator and flood an area with light, it means something. It's not just a win state, it's a metaphor made tangible. And that's more than most games can say. Let's talk about Alan Wake, the character. Because if you're going to make a game about a writer, you need to make that writer interesting. And Alan Wake, well, he's kind of an asshole. He's arrogant, he's self absorbed, dismissive of his own wife, Alice, who he views more as a muse than a partner. He's creatively blocked, sure, but he wears that block like a badge of honor. The tortured artist, too brilliant to be understood, too damaged to create. He's every insufferable writer stereotype rolled into one flannel wearing package. And that's the point. Alan Wake isn't supposed to be likable. He's supposed to be real, a flawed, selfish man whose obsession with his work has poisoned his relationships. Alice drags him to Bright Falls for a vacation, hoping the change of scenery will help him break through his. But Alan doesn't see it as a gesture of love. He sees it as manipulation, and he resents her for it. Then he disappears, taken by the darkness, and suddenly, Alan forced to confront the reality of what he's lost. The game is at its core a story about an artist being humbled by his own creation. Alan wrote a story, or something made him write a horror story, and now he's trapped inside of it. Every nightmare, every monster, every loss is a consequence of his own arrogance. He wanted to create something powerful, something that mattered, and now that creation is destroying him. There's a late line in the game. It's not a lake, it's an ocean. It's referring to Cauldron Lake, the body of water at the heart of Bright Falls. But it's also about ambition, about the gap between what you see or what you set yourself out to create and what you actually make. Alan thought he could control the story. He thought he could harness the darkness, use it, bend it to his will. But the ocean doesn't care about your intentions. It swallows you whole. Remedy knew this feeling intimately. They spent 5 years on Alan Wake, 5 years of crunch, rewrites, cuts, and compromises. The game they shipped wasn't the game they envisioned. Reality doesn't work that. You aim for perfection and land somewhere in the realm of good enough. And you just have to live with that. The torture of making art isn't just about the work itself, it's about the gap between vision and execution. It's about pouring yourself into something and realizing it will never be exactly what you imagined. It's about the cost, the relationship strained, the time lost, the sacrifices made in pursuit of something that might not even matter. Alan's relationship with Alice is the emotional core of the game, and it's deeply uncomfortable. He treats her terribly, he dismisses her concerns, ignores her needs, prioritizes his work over her well being. And then, when she's gone, He's devastated. Not just because he loves her, though he does, but because he finally understands what he threw away. The game doesn't let him off the hook, even as you fight to save Alice, even as you descend deeper into the nightmare. There's this lingering sense that Alan deserves this, that the darkness is punishment as much as it is plot. He wanted to create something powerful. He got his wish, and now he has to live with the consequences. In 2010, this felt heavy, a game about creative ambition and its cost, wrapped in a thriller framework. It was mature storytelling in an industry still figuring out how to tell mature stories. And in 2025, it feels different. We live in an era of endless crunch, of indie devs burning out, AAA studios chewing through talent and spitting out broken people. The conversation around work-life balance in creative industries is louder than ever, and Alan Wake, with his unflinching look at what creation demands from you, feels almost prophetic. It's not a comfortable game. It doesn't offer easy answers or redemptive arcs. Alan doesn't become a better person by the end. He just becomes a person who understands the weight of his choices. And maybe that's enough. Here's the thing about Alan Wake's episodic structure. It shouldn't work. Splitting a game into 6 distinct episodes, complete with recap screens and cliffhangers, feels pretty much like a gimmick. It feels like Remedy watched too much Lost and decided to put that in a video game. And yet somehow it works. Each episode opens with a previously on Alan Wake montage, recapping key moments from the last chapter. It's framed like a TV show, complete with dramatic music and carefully chosen clips. Then you get a title card, Episode 3, Ransom, or Episode 5, The Clicker, and you're back in action. At the end of each episode, you get a cliffhanger, a moment of tension, a revelation, a twist. The screen fades to black, a licensed song plays over the credits, Poets of the Fall, David Bowie, Nick Cave, and you sit there, absorbing what just happened. Before diving into the next episode, of course. It's theatrical, deliberate, and it gives the game a rhythm that most action titles lack. Instead of one long, unbroken narrative, Alan Wake breathes. It gives you a natural stopping point. Moments to reflect on what you've experienced before pushing forward. Each episode has its own arc, its own tone, its own mini climax. Episode 2 ends with a desperate escape. Episode 4 ends with a mind-bending twist. And episode 6 ends with, well, we'll get to that. The pacing works because Remedy understood something crucial. Games aren't just about mechanics, they're about experience. And experience requires rhythm, tension, and release, build up and pay off. To many gamers, just throw content at you until you're exhausted. Alan Wake knew when to let you breathe. And then there's Night Springs. Night Springs is Alan Wake's version of the Twilight Zone, a fictional TV show within the game's world. Throughout your journey, you'll find old TV sets playing episodes of Night Springs, and they're delightfully campy. Low-budget sci-fi and horror anthology stories with twist endings and moral lessons. They're totally different from the main game, lighter, weirder, more self-aware. But they serve a purpose. They're breathers, little palate cleansers between the grimness of the main narrative. They also enforce the meta-narrative. Alan Wake exists in a world where pop fiction and supernatural horror are cultural touchstones. Night Springs remind you that the genre conventions Alan is tapped in been around forever. He's not creating something new, he's stuck in a loop, recycling tropes, unable to escape the stories that came before him. It's clever, maybe too clever for its own good, because here's where the episodic format stumbles. not every episode is equally strong. Episode 1 is a fantastic setup. Episode 2 ramps up the tension. Episode 3 drags. It's the filler episode problem that plagues prestige TV. You need to stretch the story across 6 chapters, so some episodes end up feeling like padding. The pacing sags in the middle, the repetition becomes more obvious, you start to feel seams, and the cliffhangers don't always land. Some feel earned, genuine moments of surprise or dread, and others feel forced, like the game is trying too hard to manufacture drama. Tune in next time to see if Ellen survives this definitely survivable situation. But here's what Alan Wake got right, and what most games still haven't quite figured it out. It predicted the future. In 2010, the idea of episodic games was a niche. Telltale was just getting started. Life is Strange wouldn't exist for another 5 years. The notion that games could borrow structure from television, that they could be released in chapters with deliberate pacing and cliffhangers, was radical. Fast forward to 2025, episodic games are everywhere. Streaming services have changed how we consume media. Binge watching is the norm. Games like Hitman release in episodes. Live service games have seasons. Narrative games are built around TV style like pacing. Alan Wake saw it coming. It understood that games and television were converging, that the future of interactive storytelling could borrow from prestige TV. The long-form narrative, the character development, the slow burn, the willingness to let moments breathe instead of rushing to the next explosion. Not every experiment worked. The episodic structure sometimes felt like a straitjacket instead of a framework, but it was bold, it was different, and it showed that Remedy wasn't content to just make another action game. They wanted to make something that felt authored, something that respected your time and intelligence, something that understood the power of structure, pacing, and rhythm. And even when it stumbled, even when the middle episodes dragged or the cliffhangers felt forced, you could feel the ambition behind it. That's what made Alan Wake special. Not that it was perfect, but it was willing to try. Alan Wake was a game built on ambition, on meta narratives and metaphors, on atmosphere and structure, on the belief that games could be more than just mechanics. They could be stories. But ambition doesn't guarantee success. And when the dust settled, when the reviews were written, and the sales numbers came in, Remedy had to face the hard truth. It made something special, yes, something memorable, something that refused to be forgotten. But they also made something flawed, something divisive, something the market didn't quite know what to do with. So what was Alan Wake's legacy? What did it mean in 2010? And what does it mean now? Let's take a look at the numbers. Alan Wake sold around 145,000 copies in its first week in North America. For context, Red Dead Redemption, which launched 2 weeks earlier, sold 1.5 million copies in its first week. Halo Reach dropped 5 months later, moved 3.3 million copies on day 1. Alan Wake wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't the hit Microsoft needed. It wasn't a system seller. It wasn't the flagship exclusive that justified years of development and marketing budget. It was just fine. A respectable showing that quietly disappeared from the sales charts within months. So what went wrong? Part of it was timing. May 2010 was a brutal release window. Red Dead Redemption dominated the conversation. Split Second and Mod Nation Races came out the same week as Alan Wake. A month later, you had Alpha Protocol and Blur. The market was crowded, and Alan Wake was a weird thriller with divisive gameplay. And it got lost in that noise. But there's also the Microsoft factor. For a first-party exclusive, Alan Wake's marketing felt strangely muted. There were trailers, sure, some preview coverage, But compared to the Blitz campaigns for Halo or Gears of War, Alan Wake felt like an afterthought. Microsoft didn't seem to know how to sell it. Was it a horror? Was it an action game? A prestige narrative experience? The messaging was muddled, and the audience wasn't sure what they were getting. And then there's the simple truth. Alan Wake was a hard sell. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, it wasn't the kind of game you could show in a 30-second TV spot and immediately hook someone. It required patience, investment, a willingness to engage with ambiguity, and a slow burn storytelling. In an era dominated by COD and Gears, that was a tough proposition. Critics were kinda. The game landed in the low to mid 80s on Metacritic. Reviewers praised the game's atmosphere, lighting engine, the ambition of the narrative, the way it borrowed from Twin Peaks and Stephen King without feeling like a ripoff. IGN gave it an 8.5, GameSpot gave it an 8.5, Edge Magazine gave it a 7. But those same reviews also hammered the game's weakness, the repetitive combat, the pacing issues, the way episodes 3 and 4 felt like filler. Some critics thought the narration was over the top. Others felt the episodic structure was a gimmick. The game was interesting, sure, but interesting doesn't always mean good. And then came the label, Cult Classic. You know what Cult Classic really means. It means not enough people bought this game when it came out, but the people who did really love it. It's a polite way of saying the game failed commercially but succeeded artistically. A consolation prize for projects that couldn't find an audience. And for a while, that's what Alan Wake was. A curiosity. You had to be there type of game. Something people whispered about on forums but didn't actually play. But then in 2012, something changed. Alan Wake came to PC. Suddenly the game found a new audience. Steam sales, word of mouth, streamers discovering it for the first time. The game had been locked to Xbox 360, was now accessible to millions of new players. And those players started talking, recommending it, building a community around it. The beauty of PC gaming is that nothing ever dies. Some games live forever on Steam, constantly rediscovered by new generations. Alan Wake benefited from that. It wasn't a new release anymore. It was a hidden gem, a cult classic in the truest sense. People who played it became evangelists. It's not perfect, they'd say, but you have to experience it. And slowly and quietly, Alan Wake became cool. Not in a mainstream way. Not in a this is the next big thing kind of way, but in a if you know type of way. It became a touchstone for a certain kind of gamer. People who valued atmosphere over action, story over spectacle, ambition over polish. 14 years later, we still talk about it and we still recommend it to friends or people who haven't played it yet. That's not a failure, that's immortality. Here's what Alan Wake represented in 2010, the end of an era. The AA game was dying. Studios were either going indie or going massive. The middle tier games with mid-sized budgets, creative ambitions, and single-player focus was being squeezed out. Publishers wanted to guarantee hits. They wanted franchises, they wanted games that could be monetized, expanded, and turned into platforms. Alan Wake was the opposite of all of that. It was a single-player, story-driven game with no multiplayer, no DLC roadmap, no live service hooks. It was complete, it was finished, a beginning, middle, and end. No season passes, no microtransactions, no games as a service nonsense. It was a relic from a different time, even in 2010. And that's exactly why it matters now. Because in 2025, we live in the world Alan Wake warned us about. Live service games dominate. Battle passes, season passes, always online requirements, games that never end. that just keep demanding your time and money until you're exhausted. Games designed by algorithm instead of artists. Games that feel focus tested into oblivion. And then you go back to Alan Wake and it feels like a breath of fresh air. It has a vision. Sam Lake's fingerprints are all over it. You can feel the vision behind the work. It's not trying to appeal to everyone. It's not trying to be the next Fortnite or the next Call of Duty. It's just trying to tell a story, an experience to make you feel something. And that's rare in today's age. Remedy's stubbornness paid off eventually. They kept making weird games. Quantum Break, Control, and the sequel, Alan Wake 2. They refused to compromise, refused to chase trends, refused to let the market dictate their creative vision. And yeah, they struggled, yeah. They had to fight for funding, fight for audiences, fight to survive. But they did survive, and every game they made felt distinctly theirs. Flawed, maybe, sure, divisive, of course, but undeniably, it's still a Remedy. That's the lesson of Alan Wake. Not that ambition guarantees success, but that ambition is worth it anyway. Because here's the thing about playing it safe. Nobody remembers the safe games. Nobody's making video essays about the competent, polished, focused, tested products that did everyone right and nothing interesting. Those games fade, they disappear. They become line items on a sales report and nothing more. But the risky games, the weird games, the games that stumble and fall but refuse to apologize for trying, those games become legend. Alan Wake didn't sell millions of copies. It didn't win Game of the Year, and it didn't change the industry. But it changed the people who played it. It stuck in their heads. It let them think. It made them feel. It made them care. And 14 years later, we're still here talking about it, still recommending it to friends, still debating what it all meant. That's not a failure. Stephen King once said that writing is like driving at night with the headlights on. You only see a little bit ahead of you, but you can make the whole journey that way. Alan Wake took that journey through the darkness, through the doubt, through the criticism and the commercial disappointment, and the years of being dismissed as a cult curiosity. And it arrived somewhere worth going. Because the darkness isn't always bad. Sometimes it's where the best stories hide. Sometimes it's where you find the truth. Sometimes it's the only place worth exploring. Alan Wake understood that, and Remedy understood that. And if we're being honest, we need more games to understand that too. More games willing to take risks. More games with something to say. More games that treat their players like adults who can handle ambiguity and complexity and flawed protagonists. More games that aren't afraid to stumble in the dark. Because that's where real stories are. Not in the safe, well-lit spaces where everything is predictable and polished, but out there in the shadows, in the chaos, in the bunker where games past and present collide. It's not a lake, it's an ocean. And Alan Wake taught us how to dive in. Thank you for watching.